These are 5 red flags that you are eating too much, whether it's in one sitting, you'll be able to identify that, or more long-term, because it goes beyond just, okay, you're gaining weight. Like, how do you catch it before you start noticing the scale? How do you know you're eating too much? How do you know there's a problem? Well, let's break it down. The first one is you're having energy crashes. This sounds very basic, right? Because we think about going to lunch, you have a big lunch, and then you want to crash in the afternoon, right? That afternoon crash a lot of times happens regardless of a big lunch, right? So people just push the blame on a big lunch, or they push the blame on lunch in general. In reality, if you have the right size meal, the energy crash shouldn't occur. Because what's happening is you're having what's called postprandial reactive hypoglycemia. And this is when you have 2 spikes in insulin that bring your glucose down too low. So let's say you go to lunch and you have a bunch of carbohydrates and you have a big glucose spike. Well, your first phase insulin response is going to bring the glucose down. But then there's a second phase insulin response that occurs. People don't realize you have 2 phases. And when the second phase occurs 1-2 hours later, this is what oftentimes brings the glucose down below your baseline, making you crash. Although this is a physiological normal thing to happen, it is not what should be happening every day. So if you notice that every day you have 1, 2, or 3 meals that you're getting a crash from, you need to check yourself with that specific meal, or you need to get some work done to figure out if you have glucose intolerance. Because there was a study published in the journal Food that took a look at people that were glucose intolerant versus not. They gave them apples or white rice in varying orders, and they found that those that were glucose intolerant had bigger glucose spikes, bigger insulin spikes, and subsequent bigger drops, leading to stronger overactive, reactive hypoglycemia. So what this tells us is that if this is happening even with small meals, you may need to make some lifestyle changes and maybe reduce the carbohydrate intake, maybe increase the protein intake, because there's a serious issue going on. If you're not metabolically unhealthy and you just have energy crashes, you shouldn't be feeling sluggish after meals. You should feel mildly energized. So if your meal is so big that you're sluggish, you need to tone it down a notch. This next one is almost kind of funny, and it brings me back to a Thanksgiving story of mine once, and that's feeling warm after eating. I remember one time I was in a severe caloric deficit. I was really trying to drop weight. And we sat down for Thanksgiving dinner with my wife's family. And I, for the first time in 7 or 8 months, ate a bunch of carbohydrates, I ate a bunch of stuffing, I ate a bunch of pie, I ate a bunch of food. Within, 30 minutes, I was sweating madly. I was also lethargic as heck, and I felt like an undying need to move around. I felt like if I was gonna sit there, I was getting panicky. I was just so overheating and sweating. Now, this is a very real thing. The amount of energy that it takes to digest a high food load is real. And if you start noticing that you're getting hot and sweaty after you eat or feeling warm and clammy, I don't want to sound like you're a glutton, but you probably need to tone it down. We always see the cartoon characters of the big guy that's sweating while he's eating, or that's a real thing, and that is probably taking it too far. But anyhow, you probably knew that one already. This next one is really interesting, and this is a sign that you are eating too much processed food or too much hyperpalatable food. If you are having constant food thoughts, not even necessarily cravings, but food thoughts where it's just popping into your head all the time, you need to take a look at some things, because there was a really interesting study. It had subjects broken into 2 groups with 2 meals that were identical calories, okay, identical energy. One was a highly preferred meal and one was a less preferred meal, not even on the extremes. But what they found is that just the sight of the highly preferred meal increased hunger and increased food thoughts. That's no surprise, because if you saw a Twinkie next to a salad with equal calories, you might be gravitating towards the Twinkie or pizza or something, right? No surprise. But what they found is that hunger signals and all these other responses were increased while eating as well, not to mention 2 hours after eating. Now remember, they ate the same amount of calories. So conventional wisdom would have you say, well, it doesn't matter. They ate the same amount of calories, so they're going to be equally satiated because calories are all that matters. Not true. Nutrient density, energy density, and more so the psychology of how we perceive a food is going to dictate how satiated we are. So even though they ate the same amount of calories, 2 hours later, they wanted more. Now, the interesting thing is, I personally find fruit and meat and vegetables and sweet potatoes insanely good. I find them insanely appetizing. So even when I eat those that I am hugely gravitated towards, like if I had an option to eat those or processed food, I would choose that. But literature suggests that if I eat the processed food, even though I still crave the whole food, that processed food is going to make me want to eat more and impact dopamine more. And there's a lot of literature to back up what's going on psychologically, but also neurochemically. I did put a link down below for Thrive Market if you want to check them out, if you want to get snacks that are a little less hyper palatable and snacks that are not so processed. Plus, that's a 30% off discount link. So that link gets you 30% off your entire grocery order. You can get whatever you want from Thrive Market, whether it's nuts, whether it's cereals, whether it's anything that's going to help keep you satiated on more whole food, then it gets shipped to your doorstep. And you also get a free gift when you use that special link down below. Just give them a shot. I'm serious. Like if you're tired of the same old stuff at the grocery store, you just want something new and refreshing and some new taste in your life, definitely recommend you check them out. They've been a sponsor on this channel for over 5 years. So throw them a bone and throw me a bone a little bit by checking them out and helping support our sponsors that also get you some delicious food. So link is down below. The next one is acid reflux, both short and long term. Okay, when you eat a lot of food in one sitting, you put pressure on the lower esophageal sphincter. Okay, what that means is that more acid is able to come up, give you heartburn. Now, there are a lot of situations where people don't eat that much and still get heartburn. And that's usually due to some kind of issue with the lower esophageal sphincter. That's a big problem. Now, if you don't suffer from GERD like long term, and it's a more abrupt thing or happens acutely, then you need to look at how much you're eating. Of course, you need to look at the kinds of foods that you're eating, but this isn't an acid reflux video. One of the things I also want you to be aware of, are you developing a cough when you lay down? Are you developing what seems to be like laryngitis, where your voice is getting more hoarse? Are you burping more? These are all signs of silent reflux where you're not necessarily getting heartburn, but your lower esophageal sphincter is still being affected. These are very interesting symptoms that seem like they're almost respiratory related, but oftentimes they are silent reflux related and related to that esophageal sphincter. So try eating smaller meals, see if that improves. A, to improve your symptoms, but B, to help you not eat so much. And the fifth and final one, you are now having disrupted sleep. And this is not just from eating too close to bed, although that definitely makes a big impact. The American Academy of Sleep Medicine published a very interesting paper that found a positive correlation between caloric intake and sleep fragmentation, sleep disruption. The more that people ate and the more that they went over energy balance, usually their sleep was jeopardized. This is not a good thing. We've also noticed it on the other end. Too little calories will jeopardize your sleep, probably even more so. But if you're noticing that you're eating just too much at dinner, independent of anything gastrointestinal related, this caloric intake that is taken in too late in the day impacts your sleep. So what do? You reduce your calories at night and you space it out throughout the day. Again, maybe you're concerned that your lunch is going to bog you down, so you eat a little bit of a smaller lunch. Try increasing your breakfast intake so that you can still have a smaller lunch, so that you can still have a smaller dinner. So reallocate it over to breakfast a little bit more, because you're less likely to feel a crash from the morning meal than you are later in the day when you have other things working against you. I promise you that if you try eating a bigger meal in the morning, you will likely eat less throughout the course of the day, and you will be able to sustain the energy from that breakfast and feel a little bit more stable. Secondly, if you are dealing with the energy crashes, you probably are a candidate to reduce your carbohydrate intake a bit and replace it with protein. Thirdly, adding fiber, even though it seems like it's more digestive load, it's really not, because the energy is all happening in the fermentation, not in the digestion. These are indigestible fibers that get fermented in your gut, which takes very little energy from you. It takes more energy from your microbiome. So even though you might feel bloated by increasing fiber, try going in small amounts, because the caloric intake is really low with them, and you end up satiating yourself, and you get that glucagon-like peptide effect that triggers you to eat a little bit less, so you have less of the other symptoms. So these are all red flags. You're eating too much. Try to fix them. See you tomorrow.